Wait till you hear how a single line from a dusty, wounded woman turned the life of the most solitary man in the West completely upside down. It's a tale of secrets, sacrifice, and a kind of forbidden passion that will make your jaw drop. And the twist? You won't see it coming. This whole thing starts in the unforgiving, sun-baked purgatory of Montana, 1887. This place wasn't a state. It was a punishment. The sun was brutal. The silence was deafening. And in the middle of this relentless emptiness lived a man named Carl Monroe. Carl was 41, hardened, isolated. He was carved from the same stone as the mountains around him. His ranch wasn't a home, it was a fortress against the world. He spoke little, he smiled less. His life was cattle, fences, and a deep, frozen distrust of anything human. His blue eyes were just slits of ice. He wanted nothing, and he gave less. One afternoon, the heat was suffocating, blurring the air. Carl was on his porch, patching a saddle, drowning in the familiar smell of leather and dust. Comforting simplicity, that's what his life was. Then a shadow fell. It broke the focus. It shattered the monotony. Carl looked up, annoyed, and saw her. Naira, 23, Apache. She was small, covered in dust and soot, her simple clothes torn. Scratches and bruises told a story of a dangerous, desperate journey. But the real story? It was in her eyes. Even through the grime, they burned with a rare intensity, a hidden, dangerous strength. She stepped forward. Her voice was a steady murmur. "Mr. Monroe, I need shelter and work." Carl studied her with barely veiled disdain. A mocking smile played on his lips. "Shelter and work," he drawled, pure derision in his voice. "Got enough hands around here, miss. I need folks who can chop wood, not folks who need a bath." He expected her to shrink, to break, to turn and flee like every other soul who'd underestimated him. But Naira didn't move. She held his icy gaze. A slow, supremely confident smile started to spread on her cracked lips. It was a defiant smile, an amused smile. It seemed to say, "You don't know me, old rancher." "I can handle wood too, sir," she replied. Her voice was suddenly clear, infused with surprising confidence. "And anything else it takes to survive in this desert." That line, it hit Carl like a whip. Her unshakable dignity, her quick retort. This young woman, dirty and wounded, was fire. He hadn't seen anything like it in years. He snorted, trying to mask his confusion. "Wood, huh?" he muttered, feigning indifference. "Don't look fit for hard labor." "Appearances can be deceiving, Mr. Monroe," she shot back. The silent invitation, "Underestimate me." Carl ran a hand over his beard, wrestling with himself. There was something in her boldness that intrigued him, a challenge he felt compelled to accept. Plus, the cattle needed attention. Maybe a week wouldn't hurt. A week to see if that spark was a flicker or a contained blaze. "All right," he conceded, his voice rough. "1 week. Trial. If you're no good, you're back on the road." He wanted her to know this was provisional, a reluctant concession. Naira simply nodded. No triumph, just silent understanding. The battle had just begun, and Carl felt a strange, unsettling stir in his chest. His solitude was about to be shaken by a force he couldn't predict. The next morning, the high desert sun barely touched the peaks. Naira found Carl already by the corral, a lone silhouette saddling a horse. "Morning," Carl grunted, not turning. "Horses need watering. Stalls need mucking. Don't expect me to hold your hand." Naira simply approached the stable. She moved among the animals with an innate grace. She spoke to them in soft, melodic tones. Her hands were gentle but firm. The skittish beasts leaned into her touch. Carl, who finally turned, watched a flicker of something cross his face. Not approval, but curiosity. She spoke their language. The week was a relentless test. Carl offered no quarter, piling on tasks, daring her to break. But Naira met every demand with quiet, bordering on defiant resolve. She cleaned the stables until the air was fresh. Carl paused, inhaling, a subtle shift in his rigid posture. Then came the wood. Carl pointed to the dwindling pile. "Winter's coming. Cut what you can from those fallen pines." He waited for a plea, a sign of weakness. Instead, she just took the axe. Carl followed at a distance, pretending to check fences, but his gaze kept drifting back. She swung the axe with powerful, fluid motion. Each strike bit deep. No hesitation, no wasted effort. Her muscles, lean and strong, rippled. The rhythmic thud of steel on timber echoed through the quiet valley. Carl, who prided himself on his strength, felt a prickle of admiration, quickly suppressed. He'd never seen a woman handle an axe with such raw power. It was unnerving, yet completely compelling. When she returned, dragging a pile of logs, her breathing was even, her eyes clear. They met his gaze across the yard. No subservience, no fear, only quiet, unwavering pride. It was a challenge, an unspoken declaration of worth that unsettled Carl deeply. Next challenge, the well. The water had grown murky. "Needs cleaning," Carl stated flatly. "Deep and dirty work. You up to it?" He expected her to flinch, complain. She simply tied a rope around her waist and lowered herself into the darkness. Hours passed. Carl peered down, hearing the scrape of a shovel. He imagined the cold, the claustrophobia, the sheer unpleasantness. Yet when she finally emerged, mud-streaked but unbowed, her face was serene, almost triumphant. "It's done," she said. And it was done. The next morning the water was crystal clear. Subtle transformations were everywhere. The woodpile was neatly stacked. The stables felt cared for. The dusty cabin, which Carl had neglected for years, seemed to breathe easier. Without being asked, Naira swept the floors, organized the shelves, and even coaxed a forgotten wildflower into a cup on the rickety table. Carl, a man accustomed to stark neglect, watched all this with bewilderment. Order and care felt alien, almost intrusive. Yet he couldn't deny the effect. The ranch, once just a collection of labor and loneliness, was slowly, subtly, beginning to feel like something else. It was Naira's presence, her quiet competence, her unwavering dignity. He'd catch glimpses of her, working tirelessly, the line of her back strong and graceful. He found himself watching, not with detached scrutiny, but with a burgeoning curiosity. That refusal to lower her gaze had chipped away at his habitual coldness, revealing a dormant interest. The emptiness that had long settled in the corners of his home and his soul began to recede, pushed back by the soft murmur of her movements. The scent of wood and a faint, unfamiliar floral fragrance now clung to the air. The silence, once a comfort, now felt heavy when she wasn't there. He found himself lingering over his coffee, hoping to catch her by the well. Pausing by the stable door, listening to her hum a low, wordless tune to the horses. His initial dismissiveness had crumbled. It was now intrigue, and then a quiet, unsettling temptation. It wasn't just the ranch changing. It was Carl. His stark, isolated life was blurring at the edges. He found himself imagining her as a permanent fixture. The idea, once unthinkable, stirred a long-buried longing. His fortress against the world was beginning to feel like home. The week drew to a close. A biting wind swept down, bringing the first real chill of autumn. The thin walls and drafty windows of the cabin would offer little protection. Naira shivered, bundled in her thin buckskin. The meager blankets were insufficient. The ranch was about to face its true test. The unspoken understanding between Carl and Naira was about to be pushed to its limits. The chill in the air was a promise of both hardship and an intimacy neither had anticipated. Night devoured the light, and the biting cold descended, seeping into the bones. Carl felt it in his soul, but his body was the one crying for relief. He curled beneath a thin throw, the icy air a constant presence, when the image of Naira, likewise huddling in her room, appeared in his mind. The attraction he felt was a troubling warmth, and the night's brutal cold suddenly felt like an irresistible excuse. With a sigh, Carl tossed the blanket aside. The chill of the floor was a shock, but his determination was stronger. He walked down the dark hallway, steps muffled, and stopped at Naira's door. A soft, hesitant knock. "Naira?" His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, but laced with urgency. A tense silence. Then a soft response. "It's very cold," he began, feeling his ears grow warm. "Not enough wood to keep both rooms warm. No extra blankets." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Would you would you come to my room? We could warm up together. Body heat." Another pause. Longer this time. Carl imagined her inside, wrapped in darkness, considering the request. The tension was almost tangible. He knew the request was more than just necessity. A rising desire he had failed to ignore was current beneath the words. Finally, the door creaked. Naira emerged into the dimness, wrapped in a thin sheet. Her dark eyes met his with an indecipherable mix of hesitation and resignation. She said nothing, only nodded, and followed. Her silence was an answer, heavy, meaningful. In Carl's room he lit a small oil lamp. The weak glow barely held back the cold, but revealed her fragility and the seriousness of the moment. Carl sat on the bed, pulled back the blanket, and gestured to the space beside him. Naira hesitated for just a second. Then she slipped under the blanket beside him. At first, a cautious distance, the blanket a thin barrier. The air vibrated with their forced closeness. Carl felt the heat of her body radiating, an overwhelming relief. Slowly, driven by genuine need and the undeniable pull of attraction, he extended an arm and drew her closer. Naira didn't resist. Her body gave in, fitting against his. The warmth was immediate. The embrace, born of necessity, shifted instantly. Physical heat gave way to an inner flame, a long-dormant spark in Carl, newly discovered in Naira. Their hearts beat in unison. The sexual tension dissolved into a deeper connection. Carl's lips found hers, hesitant, then growing in intensity. The silence of the night was filled only by their breaths. The cold outside became irrelevant against the fire kindling between them. The night transformed into a tapestry of touches and whispers, of bodies surrendering to passion and mutual discovery. The shared vulnerability shattered the last barriers, forging a bond that transcended physical need. At dawn, the pale light revealed their entwined bodies, exhaustion and satisfaction written across their faces. The intimacy was not just a reprieve from the cold, it was the beginning of a deep, unexpected union. Days passed in a quietude that felt almost artificial. Carl and Nara lived their routines, but with each glance, each casual touch, the night resonated between them. Carl felt lighter, less cold. Genuine affection replaced his indifference. Naira seemed more at ease, though a shadow of fear still lingered in her eyes. The calm was about to be brutally shattered. The sound of horses approaching fast, the furious barking of Carl's dogs, a heavy fist pounded on the front door, nearly ripping it from its hinges. Carl in the kitchen exchanged an alarmed look with Naira. He rushed to the door, rifle in hand. When he opened it, he was met by a patrol of 4 armed men, their faces hard, their eyes scanning him with suspicion. One, a burly man with a makeshift sheriff's badge, stepped forward. "Carl Monroe," the man growled. "We're looking for a fugitive, a native woman. Tall, dark hair, large eyes. She's got a distinct scar near her left eye. Got it in a recent fight." Carl's heart froze. The description was too precise. Naira, watching from the kitchen, shrank back, eyes wide with terror. Carl saw the scar, a thin, nearly invisible line he had noticed in the lamplight that night. Now it was a sign of imminent danger. The sheriff went on, his voice filled with contempt. She killed the foreman from the neighboring ranch, Theron Caldwell. A good man, though a bit rough with the natives. They say she was one of his acquisitions, but she fought back, stabbed him to death. The words hit Carl like a punch. Theron Caldwell. Carl knew the man's reputation, a monster who used and abused native women. The accusation against Naira suddenly took on a different light. Retribution, not cold-blooded murder. The sheriff's eyes swept the dark interior. Seen anyone, any woman pass through here? Carl took a deep breath, the rifle steady in his hands. He knew the truth meant handing Naira over to these men, to the brutal justice of the West. It would mean betraying the woman he had held in his arms. He felt her watching him, breath held, her fate hanging on his answer. His eyes met the sheriff's, steady and unyielding. "No," Carl replied, his voice calm and resolute. Not a hint of hesitation. "Haven't seen anyone. This ranch is isolated, I'd have noticed." The sheriff studied him, suspicious, but Carl held an impassive expression. The man grunted, frustrated. "All right, Monroe. If you do, let us know. There's a decent reward for her." "Sure," Carl said, already moving to close the door. He pushed the heavy door shut. The latch locking echoed in the silence. Naira emerged from the shadows. Her eyes were still wide, but now filled with silent gratitude, mixed with the terrible truth of her past. She had indeed killed Theron Caldwell, a desperate act of self-defense and vengeance. Carl, by protecting her, by lying to those men, had not only saved her, but had sealed a new bond between them. A bond forged in passion and now solidified in the shadow of a dangerous secret. Naira's past was no longer a mystery, and Carl had inadvertently become an accomplice to a crime that could cost him everything. Dawn brought a heavy silence. On Carl Monroe's ranch, every sound was amplified by the tension of the night before. Naira felt the cold of inevitability. Her presence, she knew, was an open wound in Carl's quiet life, a constant threat. Her movements were deliberate as she prepared to leave. No suitcases, just a small bundle tied with the precision of someone who had lived on the road. Her departure had to be discreet, clean, leaving behind no trail or guilt for Carl. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen. She allowed herself one last look at the simple house. She imagined Carl inside, unaware of her plan. The porch creaked softly beneath her feet, a lament in the stillness. The horse, a sturdy animal Carl had lent her, waited patiently. She felt a knot in her throat. This was a farewell not only to the man, but to the promise of a life without constant fear. She reached the animal, stroked its neck. A glance of gratitude toward the house would be her only goodbye. She mounted the saddle, feeling the familiar surge of independence mingled with a stab of desolation. Her eyes swept across the barren landscape, the vast, merciless world. She was ready to face it alone once more. But before she could even guide the horse out of the corral, a figure emerged from the house's shadow. Carl Monroe stood there, tall, still, his silhouette framed by the growing light. He didn't speak, but his steps were steady, resolute. Naira shivered. He approached the horse. His strong hand reached out, not for the reins, but for the halter. He held it with a grip that wasn't commanding, but pleading, wordless, heavy with meaning. The silence between them was as vast as the desert, filled only by the whisper of the wind and Naira's racing heart. Their eyes met, and in Carl's gaze she saw something she never expected: vulnerability. The usual coldness was softened by an emotion that disarmed him. He didn't beg. He simply held the horse, leaving the decision in her hands. The sexual tension shifted into an electric current of recognition, a deeper choice far beyond physical desire. Carl finally broke the silence, his voice a little hoarse but heavy with a sincerity that struck her like a blow. He looked at her, his eyes fixed on hers, and the words that left his lips tied the past to the future. "You split that log in three, girl," he said, the memory of her arrival hanging between them. "I reckon you could split a life with me, too." Split a life, not just share chores, divide the joys and sorrows, the burdens and hopes. It was a proposal raw and honest, a partnership rooted in the promise of home. Naira felt the air leave her lungs, the weight of her journey, of a life spent running, collided with the overwhelming surprise of his offer. The danger of her past pressed heavily, but then she looked into his eyes again. The sincerity, strength, and hope were undeniable. Carl Monroe was lowering his shield for her. Slowly, an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time began to spread across her face. A smile, a genuine, hope-filled smile. It started at her lips and reached her eyes, lighting them with a brilliance that rivaled the rising sun. The horse Carl still held became irrelevant. Her path was no longer on the road. It was here, on this ranch, with this man. Without hesitation, without a word, she dismounted, her feet touching the ground in a gesture of acceptance, sealing both of their fates. Carl let go of the halter. The ranch, once a place of temporary refuge, transformed before her eyes. It was no longer just Carl Monroe's property. It was the home of Carl and Naira. The sun, now fully risen, bathed the valley in golden light. The harshness of the desert seemed less intimidating. There, where the earth was hard and life demanded resilience, love and respect had found fertile ground to grow. Carl and Naira stood together, side by side, as the dawn of a shared life unfolded before them. A silent promise of a future that, for the first time, looked bright. We just saw a hardened fortress of a man risk everything for a woman he knew for a week. A woman with a killer secret. It begs the question, how often do we mistake a hardened exterior for an empty interior? Carl Monroe had his walls, but Naira's fire found a dormant soul aching for connection. What are your thoughts on this silent dance between expectation and primal pull? Have you ever found true connection blossoming in the most unlikely of places? Share your insights and your own tales of unexpected warmth in the comments below. And if you were drawn to this tale of untamed passion, dangerous secrets, and a love that defies the odds, make sure to subscribe to Wanted Stories so you don't miss a single chapter. Hit that like button and tell us which character you think had the most to lose.